My name is Jason Chu. I'm the Managing Director at the UBC Center of Advanced Wood Processing. We will go through and introduce the speakers. I'm going to start here. Do you have a...
I think it's working.
Sean? Yep.
I'm Sean Binns, Project Director here at Kindred Construction.
I'm Kenny Dempsey. I'm Project Director here at Kindred as well.
I'm Reese Leach, Integra Architecture Principal.
Alejandro Coronado, former structural engineer, currently technical advisor with Woodworks BC.
I'm Roy Lee, and I'm with Cost Consultants with the BTY Group.
And my name is Carlos Varse, and I'm the Director of Development at Matthews West, based in Squamish.
Perfect. So next up, we'll get Sean and Kenny to come up and to talk about the 4 projects they've worked on, the 4 mass timber projects they've worked on or we're currently working on. Right?
Thanks, man. Thanks to everybody for coming out. It's a beautiful evening. You could choose to be anywhere, but you chose to be here, so appreciate it. Thank you. Kenny and I are going to talk a little bit about a couple of projects we've got the privilege of working on, which will be used as reference points as we go through our sort of Q&A and panel talk. What you can see behind me is our North Shore Neighbourhood House project. We've got the privilege of building that for Catalyst Community Developments. Architects Integra, we're working with Reese over there. She's a beast, 18 stories tall. One of the tallest mass timber towers that's being built currently, and it's a real honor to work on it. We've got a concrete on the lower few floors, then structural steel for the verticals, CLT for the horizontals, and a prefabricated panel system that builds the external envelope. We're then bolting some prefabricated balconies onto that, which is pretty novel, pretty cool. Broke ground a few months ago. We're currently putting our pile system in for our sea camp wall, and that's got about a 4-year, just under 4-year schedule. One of the exciting novelties we're hoping to run on that is a climbing core, which would allow us to go far quicker than the traditional method that often holds up mass timber in a tower format, which is having to bring the core up first and then follow on with the mass timber. Other project that will get referenced this evening, one that's very dear to my heart. 3-4 years ago when I joined, first day this landed on my desk and it's been mine ever since. And most people have heard of it within the Lower Mainland, a little place called Vienna House, which we get to build for more than a roof. Our neighbours, literally at the end of the block, Public Architecture, are the architects, and that's located just south of Trout Lake Park, providing 123 affordable units. As opposed to steel on the previous project, we've got prefabricated internal wood panels, CLT as the floor, and then a self-insulated external panel on the outside. Honestly, I could spend the whole hour talking about the quirks and innovations and challenges and fun of this project, which I won't do. We'll get into our panel. But couple of high levels has a sister project over in Vienna called Vancouver House. And the internal courtyard is something pretty novel and pretty cool there. There's a whole load of science as to how that helps through draft and makes that a pretty awesome place to live. And we're due to wrap that up late this year, early next. So I won't keep you for too long. I'll let Kenny take over for the next 2 projects.
So it's not all about size, Sean. This is equally a unique building. This is 17 stories, not 18. So this one...
But it is really.
A little bit different with this one. Same kind of structure of building. We're looking at a concrete core with mass timber floor panels around it. This one is a passive house building though, so really, really tight parameters for the structure and for the prefabricated envelope that is being provided by Flynn. It is a City of Vancouver project. Community Land Trust is the development entity on this, ZGF, the architects, and it is, as I said, 17 stories, 154 affordable units, then with 3 levels of underground, and also in this building we're providing a full level on level 2 for the community of the downtown Davie east side. Or west end, sorry, not east side. And to also just make another little point here, this may be the tallest passive house, mass timber, hybrid building in the world. So again, you know, subtle differences, and I think that's that's kind of the beauty of mass timber, and that's what we see with so many different ways of using it. And while some of them look the same, maybe even be built the same, there is a lot of unique differences that we can push through with them. With the other side of the projects on the lower scale, not the taller ones, we also have, like with Vienna House, where we have mass timber 4 to 6 story buildings. This one in Squamish, which Carlos is part of, it is also mass timber with the envelope being incorporated into the structure. Vienna House a little bit different, where the envelope is outside and supported. This one, the exterior walls are the supported buildings. So oceanfront developments in Squamish, aka Design as the architect, and then 48 building is split into 2 separate entities, one 4-story, one 5-story over a communal parkade, 90,000 square feet, and then 48 units of residential per building, with some nice views, especially down on the new peninsula that they've spent 10 years building out. So if any of you are looking to purchase, I'm sure this will be something that comes up soon for everybody. So, and this one is a little bit different as well compared to some of the taller ones, where we have to encapsulate so much of the wood. Because this is under a different code, we get the opportunity to keep a lot of the mass timber exposed. And that's one of the really, really nice things with mass timber, is that you get to see the structure. On the bigger ones, when they're all said and done, sometimes you walk in, you don't really see that it is mass timber. With this style of building in particular, and with the direction from Matthews West, we're going to have all this lovely, beautiful wood exposed, and that is really, really good. So if any of you are up in Squamish, they have a building up there that is currently going to have the House of Lager open in it. I highly recommend go take a look at that one, and that's the projects we're working on.
No, that's perfect. It's really great to see so many buildings going up across North America now. Yeah, I remember the first time we were over in Europe, just learn about mass timber like CLT, and now that I think one of our first participants was actually Klesnikov. So it actually, from 2005, it took about 13 years before they actually made the physical investment into CLT, right? But we also had, well, Mercer now, but Mercer this kind of started production in 2012, right? So, yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a panel discussion, and we'll hold off the questions from the audience until the end, right? Just to make sure that we can get through our questions that we have for the panels, right? So we're going to kind of break it down into 3 main topics. We're going to talk about design, cost benefit, and then constructability, right? So first question is, I'm going to pick on Reese there. So what are the key early design choices? So exposed versus encapsulated timber, open span, facade integrations that significantly influence the downstream feasibility of a project?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really juicy question. We could probably talk about it for an hour. But I think to start with, obviously code. That's you're gonna kick off with the scale of the project is going to dictate encapsulation or not, as you've seen with the projects that were up on the screen. Once you've knocked that out of the park and you've decided where your direction is based on that, I would say that the biggest component to the decision-making process is deciding your kit of parts. The kit of parts that I'm talking about are really all of the elements that these guys already mentioned, and so that's exterior envelope, panelizing facade systems. It might also be prefabricated balcony systems. It'll be a structural grid, so steel, wood, concrete core. If you have a podium, then that's also going to weigh into that decision-making process. So there's a ton of decisions that have to be made really early, very early, right up front. And that will then help you dictate your design. It might feel restrictive in the beginning. You might feel like, wow, I have no options for design. I have no alternatives for creativity. But under that pressure, I think that there's a really unique opportunity. And it kind of does dictate and inform a lot of the design. I mean, you can tell a mass timber building now from the outside a little bit in terms of the rigidity of the architecture, because that's really reflecting the components that contribute to that project.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate with the Brock Commons, it's 100% encapsulated, right? It's just the beauty of wood, except for the top floor, right? So hopefully with the research that we're conducting out at UBC with our fire research lab, we're going to be able to get more exposed structures, right? So good. Next one, Alessandro. What structural characteristics set mass timber apart from conventional building systems, and which key design parameters must be established early to prevent downstream coordination conflicts?
For sure. So as you guys know, mass timber is a completely different ballgame. It's a very different way of doing construction. So when we think about it, it's not just enough to say that we're going to swap the material, have a concrete building, and just swap it with wood. And I think that's where a lot of the industry is running into issues, I would say, because they're just looking at material volumes. Hopefully I'm wrong about this, but it shows like I have certain cubic meters of concrete, how much would that be in wood? And that's when people start saying that it's not economically feasible. That's a very different way of doing things because we need to implement different strategies to actually make these buildings more economically viable, because from a material perspective, it is a very premium compared to concrete. For example, as Reese was mentioning, prefabricated envelope components, clip-on balconies, structural simplicity are going to be so critical to maintain the economic feasibility for mass timber projects. And these are elements that are not normally found on concrete and steel. You may use them sparingly, but definitely they're not as pivotal as they are for the success of a mass timber project.
All right. Okay, next question is for Sean. Okay. How does your approach to the pre-construction phase change when working with mass timber? And how do factors like prefabrication, logistics, and site access influence your choice of structural systems?
There's a lot in that question as well. Our approach to pre-con, everything comes earlier. So you have to be engaged with trade partners earlier. You lose the ability to kind of figure it out as you go along. Concrete frame, traditional wood frame, like there are elements of flexibility. You don't have that with mass timber and prefabrication, which is where things like BIM modeling come in to be really important. It allows you to build a 3D version of the building you're going to build in advance, work out some of those kinks. Additionally, there's securing, as you mentioned, there's 2 main mass timber providers if we're going mass timber. Like you need to start having slots in factories booked in, paying deposits. So the answer to the question primarily is everything comes earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I remember seeing the rendering of Brock Commons, and they had each truckload come in, and that was already all sequenced into the project, right? So having to deal with all that space restraints, right? So, okay, Roy. So how does design efficiency influence the cost effectiveness of mass timber, and what design choices tend to impact the budget the most?
Yeah, I think both guys previously mentioned something about the structures integrities of mass timbers. So to us as QS, when we see projects, well, I think the biggest drivers is actually tower shape format. Because we all know that cleaner center core, concrete core with mass timbers layouts alongside with all the columns lined up perfectly, that's usually the most cost-effective ways we see mass timber building today. And I think the North Shore housings and the Davis Street are actually sharing that kind of characteristics. But talking about that though, we only see that it applies to the interior floor areas, which means the balconies is actually a different topics if we're talking about mass timbers, because we know that CLT's panels they deal with water a little different than concrete. And so usually easier cases, they would choose prefabricated designs, prefabricated balconies, which is clip-ons to the mass timbers. And that usually becomes a bigger cost drivers if we're talking about towers and mass timbers. So the balconies is not just simply an architecture feature anymore. It's more something that the architects or the structural engineers need to decide is this necessary things that we want, or just add-on features for the users.
Yeah. I remember seeing some projects in Europe where that was also a thermal bridge issue as well, right? So having those clip-on systems was something that was quite prevalent in Europe. So, next one is for Kenny. Since mass timber components are custom fabricated, what design decisions need to be made early enough to avoid costly delays or redesign later in the process?
This kind of ties in a little bit with what Sean was asked about as well, about the pre-con and the trade selection. It's very important that we understand how the building is going to be built and the different components of it, and then try and match the pre-con design with the trades who are capable of doing it, whether it's a prefabricated envelope or whether it's the installer for the CLT or the steel. Because on traditional builds, the framer tends to do most of the framing, whereas we see on these hybrid buildings especially, sometimes the steel trade does the steel columns and the CLT, or we have the framer come in and do the steel, the walls, and the CLT, So trying to bring all those components together and make sure that all of those details match up and that they align with the design and our ability to get them in together with the right trades, it's very important.
Perfect. That's a good leadway into my next set of questions on design coordination, right? So that sounds like one of the biggest topics of mass timber. So Carlos, what expectations do you set for your design team in terms of coordination, especially for the first-time mass timber projects?
Yeah. Wish I had sat in this room 5 years ago, because those are all great thoughts off the top. Yeah, it's... we have been learning more and more at each stage of the process, and I think the answer is getting everyone in the room as early as possible. And originally that was, architect, structural, code, energy. I think now it's architecture, structural, code, energy, general contractor, assembler, mass timber supplier, and that we have to grow that initial conversation because, and Reese stole my whole central thesis of tonight, which is like that kit of parts. The kit of parts isn't there yet, and so as developer clients, we're trying to figure this out as the whole industry is trying to figure it out, and I think that's going to be the greatest challenge. More people earlier.
I don't want to blame architects, but I think part of it is that they're trying to push that envelope in terms of design, right? So, and my background is more manufacturing based, and you talk about let's not talk about a mass timber building, but a kitchen cabinet. Right, that industry is they've standardized their components, right? So that everybody shares the same slides, shares the same drill patterns throughout the process. And I think that's one of the things we really need for this industry to grow, right? So, but we've talked about this catalog of homes, and that's kind of what we need, right? So some standardization. Sorry. So Reese. Yes, next to you. So what process helps ensure the design team is aligned early with structural, mechanical, and construction partners?
Early integration. Get everybody at the table, day one, together, and discuss it. I think it's critical. Like, we've done a number of mass timber projects, low-rise, mid-rise, and now high-rise, and it's consistent across all forms, all typologies. You need to understand as much as possible for every component, every consultant group, and every trade, all the requirements day one, as much as you can nail down, so that you can all approach it together as a team. I think you mentioned this already, having a GC at the table and then having trades and even a supplier at the table has been a monumental help, I think, because at the end of the day, and we're probably going to get into it, but it also comes down to sequencing of construction. So you might think that this is the best way to design it, and these are the best kit of parts to choose from. And then these guys come along and say, well, we can't sequence it like that, so all of that's out the window. So I think it is really important to have all of those elements and all those people together.
I think with more projects being developed and built, then I think those are all learning things that everybody's going to kind of apply to the future projects, right? So.
Yeah, and really it's a young industry to an extent, and so I think that we're all getting there. Like the industry is getting there, the technologies are getting there, the trades are getting there, and so it's only getting better. The more we do, the better we learn, the more we'll do again.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that we see in manufacturers over in Europe or developers is that they actually take on the project. One large company takes over the project right from beginning to end. So they've got designers, they've got fabricators, they've got structural engineers. They're all under one roof, kind of talking, much like we're talking now. But it's we're still a little bit more disconnected, right? So, but with more projects, hopefully that kind of streamlines it.
Yeah, and I think also a team that is somewhat experienced, has familiarity with the material, the product, the typology. I think that's really important too. There are so many nuances with mass timber projects that you wouldn't know, and I didn't know until after our first one. And the GC didn't know, until their first one. And the trades didn't know until their first one. And so once you've gone through it once, you can then optimize. I mean, we're talking about optimizing design through standardization of parts, but there's also an optimization of the team and the way you put it together. And we're probably also going to talk about speed of construction, which is a huge one. So, yeah, that leads into that, I think.
I think that's the nice thing about BIM modeling as well, right? So everybody's involved in the very early stages of the project. Right? So, all right, Kenny, what coordination challenges do you commonly face in achieving the scheduled advantages of mass timber, and how can design teams help resolve them?
Where to start with this one? The benefit of mass timber is that it's prefabricated. Yeah. So by that fact alone, it's going to come and it's going to be offloaded onto a truck and installed. There's just instant savings there. We mentioned earlier about climbing cores and concrete cores and details around that and how the pieces go together. Once mass timber comes into the equation, BIM comes into the equation, you can't kind of do one without the other, because many months before you hit go on fabricating that panel, you have to have every penetration, or as many as possible, outlined and detailed down to a very, very tight parameter. The toilet flange, or the toilet is going to go here, there best be a hole for it, because we can't have stuff come to site and it not work. The perimeter walls have to either hang on it or support it. They can't not meet. There's steel columns that have to go through small little slots. So all those items have to be worked on like super, super early, which means that sometimes you have to go way more into depth on that level than you would normally have to on a traditional stick build. But when the components come to site, they're ready to go and the building can just go ahead. Making sure they all come in a sequence, like was mentioned, and sometimes the architects have a different opinion, and sometimes we have an opinion, and then a trade comes along and goes, you guys are out to lunch, we're going to do it this way. Like getting that conversation to happen so that we can find the efficiency, and that might be a different type of material. Sometimes it's more money, and you go, but if we spend more money, we can save money. And that's never an easy conversation to have. But it's lots of pre-planning.
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of this with the whole mass timber. Like, it's time savings. And then we're going to talk about that a little bit later in terms of the financial benefits as well, right? So Sean, how do you coordinate across trades, especially with the MEP and structure, to reduce RFIs and field fixes?
Probably building some themes here already, but BIM truly is the answer to that. You put it in 2D, it gets checked, people think it works, they'll sign that it works, but until you've built that 3D model, like, it never ceases to amaze me how many clashes there are on a set of drawings you thought worked. So pertinent when the pieces that are going into that model or coming out of that model into the building are built weeks, if not months in advance, sometimes hundreds, depending on where you're getting your materials from, sometimes thousands of miles away. If you get it wrong, there's not another one on the shelf. You're not going to Home Depot to go and pick one of these up and like, oh, well, it's 20, 30, 50 bucks and we'll just figure it out. It is so unbelievably important, but that also, to the mechanical and electrical point, means it's not just the mass timber or the steel or the structural components that are being modeled out. It's the full MEP suite that's being modeled out. And that also involves having those trades involved pretty early as well to be part of that equation. So I know early and BIM seem to be our favorite answers to everything, but there is a reason for that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay.
I'd like to add as well there, like, standardization of some things can go a long way, especially with some of the trades that follow on for mechanical and electrical, because they get the opportunity to try and prefabricate as well and bring more stuff to site that just slots in.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a different way of thinking as well for the trades, and that's the great thing. We've got BCIT that's like really got a trades program dedicated to mass timber installers, right? So there's this more and more people that are coming on board and knowledgeable how to install these projects, right? So, all right, so value engineering, Alejandro. So how does value engineering differ from mass timber projects compared to concrete or steel? And how do you guide owners and project teams to de-risking these projects through structural system decisions?
So for the first part of the question on V, it's one of the challenges that we have as an industry is that we don't really have any standard procedures of carrying out value engineering exercises. The first thing to go, sadly, is the mass timber itself, as we have seen in many cases, as I mentioned before, because it's really just thought of as a material swap. So we're trying to tackle this through education, basically. And this is where I'm going to do a very shameless plug to Woodworks and also Twig. These kind of organizations are here to help you guys and educate team members on what is feasible and what's not with mass timber. Because one of the challenges that we find is that in BC, we have been innovators, early adopters of mass timber for decades now. We have had a lot of North America's first here in BC, including the tallest timber building in Brock Commons. But we find that for people outside of the wood industry, it's really difficult to access the world-class knowledge. So this is why this kind of event from Twig and Woodworks is really pivotal for the success of this industry to help try to disseminate that knowledge as best as we can. So the best strategy to de-risk your project, even if it's your first one, is really to get us involved as much as possible, either Woodworks or Twig. I think Woodworks is in a very unique position to help you guys because we all actually come from private, either consulting or developers, so we do have hands-on experience with these type of projects, and we can definitely guide you through it to learn the ropes as you go.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's an example of our DFMA workshop where actually he's a steel fabricator that really wanted to learn about how he can integrate mass timber because he knew it's going to be coming down the pipeline. So he took our workshop just because he wanted to, he knew he had to do it, right? Because it's going to be coming down the pipeline, right? So next question is for Roy. What are the most effective early phase strategies to keep costs within range and reduce the need for major value engineering?
Yeah, I think he brings a really good points about bringing like knowledge persons into a project before the project actually starts. And of course, as a QS, we always recommend that everyone's bringing QS earlier, because what we can do is instead of just pricing things by very generic price per square foot estimates in early stages, what we can do is we can break it down into elements. So we can break it down, like say balconies, floors, roofs, core walls, and so the developers and the owners or the contractors can see the actual cost that's allocated to those elements if we're trying to proceed with mass timbers. So we try to take out those like perceived imaginations, thinking that the cost premiums for mass timbers is just mass timber itself, and it's actually not. It's all the integrated systems that come with the mass timbers will be the cost premiums. So not for first timers, of course, they don't understand that. They just think it's just basically material replacements for concrete, and that's just not true for sure. And so if we bring in QS like us or everyone into the project earlier, we can definitely prevent a lot of major V's later on because we know what directions we are actually going to heading to.
That's good. Sean, from your perspective, when is value engineering most productive, and when does it become a risk to the viability or vision of a project?
First part of that question, my favorite answer, which is early, but probably more importantly actually is the latter part of when it becomes a problem. The window for value engineering closes a lot more quickly in prefabrication. A lot more is fixed a lot earlier that then can't be changed, or if it is changed, the saving won't be as significant as it might be in a more traditional build type where you can still make that change. I think that's something that's missed a lot. So making those decisions early and then sticking to them is almost certainly more cost effective than trying to change things further down the line.
Good. So next we'll get into the cost benefits of the project. So looking at the budget of a mass timber project and how teams evaluate the financial viability of mass timber projects. Right. So Kenny, so how does the design efficiency influence cost effectiveness of mass timber? And what design choices tend to impact the budget the most?
I guess this goes back to the architects and the consultants. From a construction point of view, you know, the most cost-effective way is to have just a giant square building with just 90-degree angles, plain and simple. You know, but not everybody likes that. So trying to get a design that is efficient, that is easy for us to come and build in a clean and simple and logical way with easy transitions from trades. Like that's the most efficient way to build a building, and that doesn't matter whether it's wood or concrete or any other material. So again, you know, the theme of the night a little bit is BIM and going back to that prefabrication, trying to get as many easy steps through the process from one to the other in as clean a logical path as we can. That's the most efficient way. So.
All right. Yeah. So Carlos, what kind of guidance or data would be most useful to developers early in the process to reduce risk and improve cost alignment?
Yeah. You know, when we started planning our buildings, we went down the path of mass timber because of its qualities. So just the quality of feel when you're in the building, and that's kind of driven a lot of our decisions since then. We've gone out to the industry, which was younger at the time, and I think is evolving quickly and for the benefit of us using mass timber in projects. But you know, we had to troubleshoot a lot of options at kind of every step of the process ourselves and figure it out. And maybe that's developers in the industry maybe not sharing information as well as we should, or not being involved in Woodworks maybe. A plug for you there. So yeah, I think what would have been great was to have all the answers, which we're still looking for as we're building these projects at the outset. I think my biggest skill set now from the developer side is I can sit in a meeting and say no to an architect or a designer, right? They have, oh, we have this great idea, we should try this. No, we went down this path and we explored it, and unless you can tell me a reason why it's different now, then we're not going to do that. And I think that experience and that lack of experience that kind of we had at the early stage, and the lessons we learned often quite like the hard way, is the best skill set that we bring. And so I think for those people, like I think there's a lot of consultants in the room or suppliers, like you're looking for clients on the development side. I think you need to pick clients that have a longer term view and are looking at their first and second project not as like this is the project, but this is a project that's a stepping stone for how we understand how to use this building material, how we understand how to integrate these processes that take a lot more thinking on the front end. You're not going to get it on the large groups that have done it the same way and continue to do the same way and iterate, you know, 2 or 3% each time, and you're certainly not going to do it on the mom and pop. They got to get in, got to make their money and get out. So I think it's finding that right client to test these things, and it's very context specific. Like I look at those projects, there's a lot of affordable housing projects up there. We have an affordable rental building. In my mind, that's like the one building we're not going to do in mass timber because it might not be the right fit. So long-winded answer, but
yeah, we're all still learning in this industry, right? So but what that is, as long as we're willing to share, the whole point is that we really want to grow this industry, right? So, Roy, what are the most common financial misconceptions you see among developers exploring mass timber for the first time?
Well, I guess the first easy ones that we always see is that they think they can just take a project they did before in concrete towers and swap with mass timbers. That's a very, very big no-no for sure. I guess everyone at these stages should kind of have that knowledge in mind, because it's just not that simple. The way of how mass timber works is totally different to concrete for sure. That's the first one. And the second one we see is they think, well, they know building code says mass timber is non-combustible materials, and they they think that will same as concrete, so they think the insurance premiums that they're going to pay for constructions will be the same as concrete. But unfortunately, the insurance industry is still not recognizing mass timber as part of non-combustible materials. So what they actually get is they get the insurance premiums for the frames, insurance premiums, and that difference by quite significant depends on the project size. Because frame buildings can be very small in terms of size, but if you're building high-rise towers, that's totally different stories. Yeah, so those are the usually two misconceptions we see quite a lot for any new developers are trying to proceed with the mass timbers these days.
All right, I'm going to go to the architect now. And how can architects identify and optimize design elements like floor systems or balconies that tend to carry cost premiums in mass timber?
Yeah, I started to feel picked on. No, I think I'll flip it on the head. We could be the biggest problem. We could also be the biggest advantage. We're great problem solvers and creative problem solvers. So I think, we architects generally or design consultants bring a huge amount to the table. Just briefly about, we've been talking a lot about, a lot of these responses are really focused on tall timber. But I think some of the responses really differ if you're talking about low-rise residential, or even if you're talking about mass timber in terms of office or other typologies. So yeah, I want to caveat a lot of these answers with that kind of lens. But I think in terms of decisions for design related to cost optimization, it really comes down to, again, I'm going to keep banging on this, kit of parts. I think that there is a lot of creative opportunity in mass timber projects. It doesn't just have to be a box. It could be a really interesting box that changes shape. It could be a box with missing boxes. You can put a box in a box and it's pretty cool. I think that there's tons of creativity. There's also creativity that's not just revolving around the exterior aesthetic of the building, but creativity in how you're solving problems of the site, or how you're solving problems of the balcony connection through the facade panel to the CLT. I think that there's tons of opportunities to find the right solution as you work through the project, and to do that you need to have the right team. That goes to Woodworks apparently. So.
Perfect. So the next question is again to do financial benefits. This is going to go to Roy. So how reliable can developers expect schedule savings with mass timber? And how do those time gains impact financial costs or project internal rate of return?
Yeah, so I will break this question into two actually. So first question is about schedule savings. I think to be realized there's a schedule saving in mass timber projects, there are several factors that actually we need to consider from an owner's point of view. Is that first of all, you need to know how reliable the contractor is coordinating with all the subtrades during the mass timber constructions. And secondly, that how realistic is the sequence of each members going on. Like for example, we can say using a flying formwork for the core, and how that's sequencing with the panels installation times. And sometimes even the crane hook times matters a lot in terms of those schedule savings. So let's just say we have all those lines up. We can definitely see schedule savings for sure. Like usually we say around 10 to 15% compared to a similar tower in concrete. And those time savings that can directly transfers to the project cost. Let's say interest reserve costs, you have to pay less interest because you have shorter construction time. You have to pay less insurance. We know mass timber insurance is not cheap. And then we can save sometimes on general conditions sometimes as well. So those are the real savings that we can see if we see the schedule saving there. But the second questions that we touch on is how is that benefits to the IRR? And that's different stories to me, because we all know IRR involves the periods of the investments. But for private developers, what they usually see is they usually use ROI, return on investments, as their benchmarking towards when they see is this project is making money for them instead. So The reason that because during the entirety of constructions, they only have 20 to 30% of equity injections into their entire budgets. And the rest of the money is just basically financed. So with that high leverage amounts of monies, the IRR doesn't really work with them. That's why they're only looking at ROI. And secondly, on the other hand, though, it's the nonprofits groups, the social housing groups. They have a longer views in terms of projects. They will eventually own and operate the buildings. So what IRR means to them is just to their entire life cycle of buildings. It's really just a margin of the savings there is for them. So then in that cases, they focus more on the durabilities and how the residentials tend out to be. So we all know that schedule savings can be a good thing because they can get the housing faster, but those things won't be their main targets when looking at the IRR in that cases.
Thanks, Carlos, we're going to switch topics a bit. So carbon incentives. So are carbon incentives or credits and ESG mandates moving the needle yet in underwriting mass timber projects, or is it still aspirational benefits?
It's not moving the needle yet, but so we live and operate in Squamish. You know, we have this beautiful step code that was meant to step up, and each step we get closer and closer to buildings that are efficient, and our municipality, and unlike a lot of municipalities, just kind of jump to the top step. And so I think they're going to do the same when it comes to the carbon code. I think that's just an assumption that is a safe one for us. And so the answer is no, it's not affecting us now, but we know it will be in the future. And so the smarter we can be, knowing that we're going to be in that community for 20 plus years, the better.
Perfect. Kenny, how significant is schedule reduction when using mass timber, and how does that translate to real financial value?
How many cranes am I allowed to have? It comes down to hook time a lot with mass timber. If we have, you know, a building form that is like the two towers, where you have to build the core first, you got to find an efficient way to do that to get the mass timber coming along as quick as possible. Generally, you know, you're restricted to have one crane doing that, so that's putting concrete in. It's not doing mass timber. If you want to really find a way to be efficient and get the benefit out of it, you got to have the two of those working in tandem. On the lower buildings where there's, two separate buildings, or where it's a 5-6 story, there is opportunity then to use smaller standalone cranes or self-erects that will provide additional hook time, which means you can be working in two places at once. So that's the biggest way to get efficiency in mass timber, is just have more of it going in, because we can line trucks up, but if you're working in like downtown Vancouver, you can line one truck up.
Yeah.
So one crane, one truck, that's about it, as much as you can do.
Yeah, I remember speaking to one of the pioneers of mass timber installation, John Boyce. He helped install the panels, the first actual CLT panel at the Earth and Ocean Science Center at UBC. And when he got called onto site after the initial contractors couldn't figure out mass timber, that was the first thing he asked for. He said he needed a dedicated crane on site, right? So it's great he said that. So turning to constructionability. So Sean, so how does mass timber procurement timelines differ from conventional systems, and what implications does that have on the pre-construction planning? We're going to talk about BIM again.
It kind of turns it on its head, which is part of the fun. That goes from your procurement to your cash flow. Typical cash flow is in an S-curve. I still haven't figured out the shape of a cash flow curve on a CLT building, truthfully. It's so all over the place. You're having to procure your prefabricated items so much earlier. And where that can create challenges is who's funding that procurement and making that commitment. It's quite a scary prospect when you perhaps haven't got a BP yet, or haven't got to the point you've tendered the project out to know if it's viable yet, to have us saying, hey, we need to place a contract for millions, if not tens of millions of dollars with somebody who's going to show up 2 years from now. Like it's scary. So it's different in that regard, like significantly different in that regard. The traditional procurement route and process and anybody's typical procurement schedule really gets turned on its head.
So this next question goes to Roy in terms of cost. How do you advise clients on managing price volatility and supply capacity constraints? Because we've only got 2 main suppliers in BC of CLT.
Yeah, usually the key advice that we give to clients is trying to diversify the sourcing routes options here in terms of local ones, the international ones actually. We all know we have very strong and growing local suppliers about mass timbers going on, but sometimes if we have more projects coming in the futures in the pipelines of mass timbers, they can somehow hit their capacities. We do have projects seeing that their lead times cannot line up with their construction schedules that can kind of delay their projects as well. So what we usually do is that we suggest them to look for any international resourcings. And countries like Finland, Austria, or Norway, they have a very mature production volumes and very like logistic networking, very experienced logistic networking. So we do see cases that they actually provides very competitive quotes compared to local ones if everything works right. But of course, there's a trade-off with bringing international sourcing into the tables here. It's like we are going to experience longer lead times, port delays, possibilities, currency fluctuations, all the things like that. The suggestions we're trying to make here is we're trying to make the owners or the developers or even the contractors is that we're trying to bring, make them ready, make them have a broader toolkits in their pockets. So when anything else doesn't turn out for local suppliers, you always got a plan B for international ones. And we have to do it early as everyone's saying today. Everything has to be explored earlier, then you can know how to react later on if you see any problems coming up.
So you've dealt with the international suppliers of CLT as well?
Yeah, we did some quotations with Finland and Austria, some of the major ones in there as well.
And price-wise, how does that compare?
It's interesting because they produce mass timbers just like a spaghetti factories. They just do whatever they want, and if the local supplier is hitting the maximums, sometimes they will. I don't want to really use the word turn down, but some projects not big enough for them to actually sacrifice their production capacities for other big projects. So then for those contractors or developers, if they look for any international sourcings, that can be a good plan B for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, so speaking of like making decisions early though, sometimes you have a span in your building design and you have just eliminated half of your suppliers, right? And so it is a scary, and sometimes you're working with a supplier and they go bankrupt, which has happened in the last 5 years, right? So like, it's those early decisions that are so stressful from the development side, because you do kind of have to pick a horse or a smaller series of horses early on.
Can I jump in as well?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think it's important to design your structural grid, your CLT spans, to be the most flexible for the tendering process, because at the end of the day, these projects are trying to be tendered, they're trying to be competitive, and if you're locking in a CLT supplier, if you're locking in a exterior panel wall curtain, unitized curtain wall supplier, if you're locking in a prefabricated offsite balcony supplier, where's the competitiveness in the tender? And so I think that's something we've been working through, on a number of projects, is ensuring that you're as flexible as possible within that, and your specifications are as flexible. That's really important.
Yeah. I'm gonna challenge that notion just a little bit, because there are manufacturing efficiencies that we can account for very early on that may actually offset that cost, I think. So I wouldn't say it's just leave it up till the end, but I would say just have a chat with your local supplier. Most of them are more than willing to just look at your project even well before tender, because there are very real manufacturing efficiencies that we can account on to get the costs down as much as we can.
Yeah, I think one of the things with we only have 2 suppliers in BC, right? So when you go to these factories in Europe, they're fully automated. We've gone to visit factories where they've got 8 people running a CLT production line, Whereas you go to some of the companies that we have here, they're very labor intensive, very manual operations, right? So with that, with more demand, hopefully we'll get more of these vertically integrated companies like Kolesnikov, where they manage the force all the way to the now to the modular prefab systems, right? So, yeah.
I've found in tendering that the European versions tend to be a little bit vague on how much it's going to cost to ship it here. So tend to like caveat that a little bit. So
Yeah, hopefully the cost savings from the material side can offset some of those transportation costs, right? So, all right, now getting down to the logistics. So I'm going to pose the question is going to be both for Alejandro and Reese. How do construction sequences and design decisions together impact on-site handling, such as facade integration, access strategies, material selection, and erection prefabricated elements?
I can start it off, yeah. This is actually a very undecided challenge that we currently have. I'm going to be talking mostly from the structural engineering point of view. Because from very early in our careers, we have been conditioned to not care about temporary conditions or construction sequencing. Most structural engineers, I'm sure you have run into this, they claim it's means and methods, so I'm not going to comment on it. Very frustrating, I've said so myself multiple times, but unfortunately, it's a liability concern. But I think thinking about those temporary conditions and how it's going to affect the sequencing and overall the speed of construction and cost is really what separates good from great structural engineers in the mass timber world. It's just that little bit of knowledge, thinking about the sequencing on which the screws are going to be installed, which panels need temporary propping, for example. Those are not usually thought about big cost drivers, but in my opinion, they can definitely be. For example, if you're using a timber concrete composite system and you need to shore it, that can be a considerable cost that you may not be accounting for because you didn't think about that temporary condition where the concrete is wet.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that there's, I'll give you two really great examples from active projects. One, drilling down to the small details of delivery of CLT panels to site. Water obviously is a big concern when it comes to building with wood, particularly in the high-rise format. And I think bringing panels to site that are pre-protected is a huge component that isn't really part of the architectural design, isn't really part of the envelope because it's about means and methods, but it plays a significant role in the viability of the panel once it's on site. Another really great one, which has been a challenge, is the connection of a prefabricated balcony system through or to a unitized curtain wall envelope. So either you're tying that balcony back to the CLT structure, or you're trying to hang that balcony from the unitized curtain wall system that is then hung from the CLT panel itself. There's a ton of nuances within that, one of which is sequencing, and you can probably guess which one is better for construction, but there's also the nuance of liability and responsibility of that between which engineer. So is it the base building engineer for the substructure for the balcony connection point? Is it the envelope or cladding engineer of the unitized curtain wall system? And obviously the supplier and engineer of the balcony system as well, looking at both those guys and thinking, well, who's going to take the responsibility?
I think I know the answer for this one, but Carlos, how do your design decisions affect on-site handling for size of elements, connection tolerances, erection sequencing?
Yeah, we've got a fairly easy go of it, as our entire site is just 65 acres of vacant land. And so our hope is that when we really get into production, where trucks are rolling up and parking, and so it's not really a problem for us at the moment. But our constraints are more the rain, and especially in Squamish on our site, the wind, right? And so, luckily I can put that on Kenny to think about, and means and methods, that guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I'm going to ask you the same question then. Site sequence.
Hook time. Like logistics is such an important thing, especially with mass timber, because we can't afford to leave it on the truck because we'll have to pay to leave it on the truck. So you want that just-in-time delivery to come and be picked off the truck and put into place. If you have one crane, you have one truck. If you have two cranes, you have two trucks. You know, it's as simple as that. But trying to look at how it gets there and making sure it gets there in time it's so critical because everything is waiting on it to happen. So.
Yeah, sure. So no, that's great. Now we're going to start slowly wrapping up the discussion here. So I'm going to ask each one of you a question in terms of looking ahead with the industry and where you see it going. So Carlos, what would give you greater confidence to pursue mass timber more frequently in the pipeline?
Yeah, for us, it goes down to the kit of parts, and if we were able to have pricing associated with certain systems that we can then pass on to our architects to start working on, like that's where I think the industry needs to go and will go. For us right now, we see it as the future of construction. We see it as the future of kind of market appetite and demand. It's beautiful when you're in these buildings. I think that's like, we all get stuck in the details, but like ultimately, like these buildings are beautiful to be in. And that's, I think, what matters to the person on the street. And so for us, we just see that as the North Star, and we're going to try and get there.
All right. So from a cost consultant's perspective, Roy, how can the quantity surveying community help advance mass timber adoption in a cost-sensitive market?
So to us, I think what we can do is that first of all, I think the things we can do is to do the more communications with or educations to the owners or developers from QS sites. We as a QS that we usually involve earlier in the projects because the owners want to know how much budgets is this project reasonable to them or not. And what they usually do is they see mass timber more like a sidelines items because all the preceding unknowns. They don't really treat them as a designs that can actually go into deeper stages. So I think QS, what we can do is we can quantify those risks, bring to the tables early stages, so the developers or the owners can see the comparison between the choice of different structures for that projects and actually make a more educated decisions which way they would want to go, instead of they think it's just a sideline, so they just say no, and then they just VE out the mass timbers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alessandro, where do you see the greatest opportunity for innovation in mass timber systems over the next 5 years? So
it's pretty obvious that we're approaching a turning point for the mass timber industry. I think the fact that we have 3 18-story buildings on the ground right now, it's proof of that. So when that widespread adoption does happen, and it's a matter of when, not if, I think, we're going to need a lot more suppliers to be online to be able to get on every single project in BC. But a lot of people think that we need to lean more on vertical integration like they do in Europe. I actually don't think that's the case. I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities for just supplying pressing CLT and glulam as a billet format. And even more importantly, small to medium fabrication shops to actually get online to handle that demand. So it's really an opportunity for the province as a whole, not just these vertically integrated suppliers. So I'm sure they're going to capitalize on it as much as they can.
All right. Sean and Kenny, from your experience, what's the single most important factor for the success of mass timber projects, and how does early contractor involvement influence that outcome?
Single biggest thing, I'm going to take 2, which isn't single, but hook time. But one that hasn't been spoken about as much is getting watertight as quickly as possible. This is a product that is susceptible to the rain, susceptible to moisture, and we live in a rainforest. It's kind of the ultimate paradox in dealing with CLT. That truthfully threads back through everything we've spoken about this evening, through simplification of design, kit of parts. These things allow us to build quicker, more efficiently, and get weather tight quicker. Unless somebody comes out with some kind of miracle sealant that protects CLT and allows it to breathe, and if anyone wants a business idea, that would be a great one. Until we figure that out, it's going to be figuring out the keeping it dry long enough to get it fully encapsulated, and then that it has no negative effect on the panel moving forward.
Yeah, especially when we got 9 months of rain, right? So.
It doesn't help.
Okay, Reese, looking ahead, what's one early design suggestion you believe more teams need to prioritize in order to set mass timber projects up for success?
I'd definitely say, and then this one actually hasn't been said yet, and that's actually, it is really specific. It's unit types. I think that it kind of leads into the modularization of design, and I think as everyone has kind of talked about, the more we can standardize, the faster we can build and the more successful these CLT projects can be. And so I think actually that so standardization of unit typologies that lean into and maximize the standard sizings of CLT paneling and also the structural grids. So I think that's a really significant component, because it's really the way we all start projects is, you know, obviously doing feasibility studies and looking at unit sizes and checking what the yield's going to be. So I think that actually is a really key component that we haven't really discussed.
All right. So this leads me to the final question that's going to open to the panel here. What excites you the most about the future of mass timber, and what do you still need to get right to unlock that potential? Go ahead.
I'd like to say, I think for me and mass timber, the versatility of it, like we've talked about many different options here, and mass timber is able to do all of them, whether it's balconies hanging off or supported by, or, you know, and even driving by the P&E today and seeing those beautiful big arches that they've erected. Like, there's so many different things you can do with wood, and we can grow it. Like, it's phenomenal that. So, like, I think that's one of the biggest benefits to mass timber going forward. Just versatility alone.
Perfect.
I can go next. Yeah, actually, no, I'm going to skip this for now. I lost my train of thought.
I'll jump in. I think, like, we've kind of mentioned that we've been quite serious in our responses about the key components of a successful CLT building. And we all know why we want to do CLT projects or what the benefits are, but I think it's really important to demonstrate that to everyone else. And it is a beautiful material to work with. And, you know, beautiful in terms of construction, fabrication, but even beautiful in terms of sequencing. It is just absolutely flabbergasting how fast CLT projects get put together. You know, I've been on site many times, and the panels are flying in, and it is a silent symphony. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. You've got 3 people on site erecting an entire floor of a building in a day. Like, it's just, until you've actually witnessed it, it still feels hard to comprehend, and it's mind-blowing. And it still sets a lot of people back and say, well, hang on a minute, is the rest of the building being constructed just as fast as the CLT is being landed? And so I think that's a really like beautiful component to this material that, you know, is maybe a little bit undersung.
I think I'm back.
Go for it.
One of the most exciting things I think that are happening really is the willingness of the construction industry to not just adopt this, but actually embrace new technologies and what is a relatively new material. And thinking back, I don't think that it has ever happened at the pace that it has. Just a fun fact, we had the tallest mass timber building back in 2009, way before Brock Commons actually, and that was only 6 stories out of Prince George. So since now, then again, we're gonna have 3 18-story mass timber buildings. This is like unprecedented adoption rates, and hopefully that's gonna continue on. But it's really been surprising to see how every single member, or most members of the construction industry, have really embraced this opportunity as much as they can.
Sure, thank you. I guess for me, the most exciting part is how modularity is the mass timber is, because we started seeing companies like intelligent cities, they actually use CLT panels as part of their prefabricating systems, that they sandwich the HVAC systems into their CLT panels, and that become another new prefabrication systems. So resonance with other people's sayings is that the versatilities of mass timbers can be a really like a building blocks for our futures constructions in terms of prefabrications, modularities, and not missing out the qualities that actually brings to the people using it, like the wood feelings from it. And I think the other question you mentioned about what kind of potential we need to do, I think what Twig is doing here tonight is very important, that we need to let public awareness know more about this kind of materials, that what kind of benefits it can bring. Because people these days, the general public, basically, they see mass timber as a novel. They don't know that this can be a serious embodied carbon improvements in terms of construction materials, all the benefits that can bring to the users inside the buildings. So I think this more and more of this kind of events coming up to not just industry-wise, but also general public will be very beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll echo that. I think what I'm most excited for is the buyer perception of mass timber. So I remember 8 years ago sitting in office at Rennie Group, and Bob Rennie was there, and he said, you know, I can't sell passive house, but I can sell mass timber. People can see it and people can touch it. I can sell that. And I think that long ago, his hope was that when people think of concrete and mass timber, it's like a level plane. And so the challenge for us is when we're building with mass timber, are we, especially with exposed mass timber, what level of attention are we paying to acoustics? Like I put Kenny through the ringer trying to figure out a layup that's going to make it so that when people move in, they're not going to say, oh, I'm in a wood building and I can hear the person below me, I can hear this person above me. So it's like, it's that quality. And if we can deliver that quality, I think the perception to the buyer will be, I want to be in a mass timber building. And ultimately that's what allows us to get these projects built is the perception there that if you're moving into a mass timber building, it is better than wood. And hopefully it is better than concrete. And we can sell all these other opportunities when it comes to carbon sequestration and the rest of it. Us nerds care about that. I don't know if the public does yet, but that's kind of our goal, is to make it, we got to make mass timber sexy.
Yeah. And hopefully with all the research that we're doing out at the university in terms of the fire research as well, that we kind of get that message out to them that it is a safe building to be in, right? So like all these discussions, like bigger, taller, stronger buildings, like that's all those are the type of research that we're doing out at UBC. So definitely from the architect's perspective, the bigger spans you want, that's more research that we have to do at the university. But what we're also seeing a lot of is that it's not just mass timber. There's going to be a lot of hybrid systems. You talk about these concrete to wood connections. There's going to be metal to wood, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities. It's not just really kind of say like we're going to build concrete or wood. There's going to be kind of these hybrid systems that are really going to help move this industry forward, right? So I think the plan is any other. Anybody else want to speak on that?
In terms of things I'm looking forward to, people have mentioned how beautiful a material it is. You've mentioned that it's sellable, but we still have a cap at 12 and 18 stories that actually it's encapsulated, so nobody knows it's this beautiful material. So what I'm excited about is development in code and fire type things that will allow us to actually show the material off more. I think there'll be a driver for that. I think that will come around in time, and that's pretty exciting. And we also talked about, Reese mentioned that we sort of see the speed the CLT can go in with, but the rest of the building can't follow. I might not be 5 years, but I hope within 10, whether that's in a volumetric format or a further pre-con format, or how we start to run potentially mechanical and electrical systems into panels, like that excites me of like how we're gonna push the typology on and actually speed the things that follow up as well to really maximize it.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot development in the volumetric and panelized industry as well. It's just like what we're seeing in Europe. I showed you the photos of the pod systems, right? They're just dropping in these bathroom pods because that's one of the most timely processes in a building, right? So it's prefabricated, 99% complete, and it's just dropped down to site, right? So that will really kind of push the speed of completion as well, right? So, all right, I think we're going to open up some questions to the audience. We're kind of running towards the end of our time, but anybody have questions in the audience that they want to ask the panelists? Okay, the microphone.
Just on that last note with the pods, do you see anything like that happening in BC anytime soon? having bathroom pods for speed of construction?
You were on the tour with me.
I what? I like them.
Yeah, so there were definitely participants that were quite interested in the pod system. And so we'll see. I think it does take, part of it is policies and regulations, because these pods are completely built in a factory where they'll have to get all the inspectors, like the plumbing, electrical, and structural inspectors. So essentially it's more of a, like we were just over on the island at a company called Nexus Building Solutions, and they do a 99% completed modular pod that they drop onto the back of a property where you just plug in the plumbing and the electrical, right? So their process is actually CSA approved. So that's, I think, it's more policy and getting people on board.
We're seeing it. We've got a project in our hospitality division in the United States, and they just finished up a project in Colorado, which was a hotel. And so I think it's quite viable from a hotel perspective, dropping them in.
So, like, not to age myself, but 25 years ago, we flew bathrooms from Italy into a Radisson hotel on the west coast of Ireland and just dropped the pods in like that. So Europe has been doing these things for a lot longer. So they've worked out so many kinks around it, and they also, there's an industry grown up of supply of these secondary things. There's multiple suppliers of these pods over there, so you can kind of, you know, pick and choose to a certain extent, and the design has followed on because of the supply of them. So one thing that has to happen here is the secondary suppliers, the mechanical entities, the electrical entities, all those secondary suppliers have to up their game as well to work with mass timber and find innovative ways to, it might not be a full pod, maybe just a wall system, but at least push that envelope.
Yeah.
I could probably also add to that, just to tie that back, the off-site production component of mass timber in these tall towers, leading to off-site production of panelized exterior curtain wall systems or balconies, is actually creating a unique challenge for design consultants to do field reviews. You know, one of the interesting concepts of a field review, you're going to site, you're doing a progress review, you're checking that Kindred's doing what they said they were going to do, and that they're billing appropriately, which they always are. You want to make sure that you can do that in an off-site fabrication method, right? The current contract methods of like CCDC2 and things like that don't really anticipate the level of off-site production that can occur in buildings like this. And so it's something that we're still learning to deal with and ensure that municipalities are also on board with building inspectors.
That's right.
For Reese. Hi, Reese. As a fellow architect, I'm wondering how you, because I heard a lot of early, and one thing that I realize is that getting everybody in the room early is how do you get everybody, or how do you pay for that extra work up front? Talking about BIM, coordination, pre-con, all these things are a lot more manual labor. I'm wondering what your approach is when someone comes to you saying they want to do, say, a wood frame building and then it switches to CLT, or it wants to be a concrete building and then, oh, actually CLT sounds great. How do we have those conversations? Because it's not necessarily more expensive, so how do we set ourselves up so that we can actually do a quality job consulting with everybody happening early, with all these things front-loaded? And how do you broach that with your client?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was actually talking earlier about this, but at the very, very beginning, when a client discussion, if I get a whiff that there might be a CLT component to the project, I ask straight away. I'm very interested in the typology early on, and I think you probably are already with any other project, whether it's mass timber or concrete, steel, wood frame. That question gets asked, I think, very early on, gauging the interest from the client, and then gauging the appropriateness. And I think at the end of the day, like we talked about, mass timber is not necessarily the solution for absolutely everything, but it is a great solution for significant problems in the way we construct. I also think that it's hard for architecture and other consultants to remain as neutral as possible. And you definitely don't want to be seen, or maybe you do want to be seen, you don't want to try and push a client one way or the other. You want to present the most appropriate options and let the decision, let an educated decision be made. And I think that kind of relies on groups like Twig and Woodworks to help you educate the client. So it doesn't look like it doesn't look or isn't coming from you directly, but it's coming from other well-educated individuals that can help present those options to the client.
If I may just add, we can be the advocates on your behalf. If you don't feel comfortable enough making the pitch for a mass timber building, we're here to help, basically. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we kept harping on the early engagement, but that also means that we need to be, it's easy for me to say because I don't really have any skin in the game, but a really strong commitment for a mass timber building. It's not just enough to talk about it in the very beginning. You really need to be fully committed, because there are ways that we can make it economically viable, but again, you really need to design for it from zero, basically. That's when you start considering as an alternative material, that's when really you run into problems with costing.
Hi there. At the moment, I'm framing and forming custom homes, and my question is, how, as a contractor, can I join and start building mass timber buildings? Because I think it's extremely exciting. I feel like it is the future because it's environmentally friendly. I think the future policies will be very friendly towards that industry, and I really want to join. As like I literally want to build the mass timber buildings. So that's my question. Where can I start as a contractor? Yeah.
I'll just say dip your toe in. So when you're talking to a client and you can show them how beautiful it is, maybe make their living room mass timber, maybe not the whole house. And I think that's probably the best way to learn your licks, because the challenge with working in the high-end space is that you have to hide everything. And that's super hard to do with mass timber. And so, figuring out how you're going to put in your lighting, how you're going to put in your electrical, how you're going to hide these things behind what can be, 3 or 5 ply walls is going to be a challenge. And so don't do the whole house, would be the piece of advice I have. Do a little portion, maybe even just a roof.
I'm going to echo that thought and expand on it a little bit more. I think we can also apply that to just any kind of building. There is this misconception that if we're going to go mass timber, we should be 100% CLT, for example. That's absolutely not the case. Mass timber itself, I see it more as a complementary material. When it comes to tall wood, for example, steel columns and concrete cores is a great system. But even in low-rise, it doesn't necessarily need to be CLT walls and CLT floors. It could be light frame with a CLT floor. There are so many different ways of adopting a mass timber to suit our construction practices. Because in general, I think people tend to rely a little bit too much on what they see in Europe, where they tend to build these sort of CLT boxes. But that absolutely, that's not the way that I think we should go as an industry. We have a very different way of constructing and doing buildings, and we should really try to adapt mass timber technology to our way of doing things, as opposed to just trying to completely reinvent the wheel and design CLT boxes that can do somewhere else.
I think that his question was more along the lines of how does he go from framing a single family home to someone like you, Carlos, being comfortable to hire him to frame a mass timber apartment building. What are the incremental steps to gain comfort, to get space within the industry?
Start with the living room. No, but I think that's, there is this space opening up for contractors that are familiar with this material. But it's starting small. And I think, I think about pump stations, right? Like municipal projects. There's these smaller projects that if you can get involved in and learn how to manage this assembly, you're going to provide that confidence to eventually get to a building. But, part of the frustrating part on hearing on the panel is there are so many ways to do it. You talk to your structural engineer. Different structural engineering firms have very different decision-making trees when it comes to mass timber, right? I've heard the ductility of a CLT panel too many times. I don't even know what that means, right? But there's different ways to do it. So you kind of have to find the niche and find a few small projects and then apply that to the larger ones. But it's going to be a challenge, and I think those that are ahead of that curve are going to be well advantaged in the future.
I think there's also a component of education. it's going to be difficult to get a job constructing a CLT project if you've never done one before. But I think there's great courses at BCIT, Woodworks, Twig that will enable you to educate yourself on the process and on the typology, on the material, the benefits, the qualities, the pitfalls. And I think getting into the education of it will be an important component to making that switch or jump.
Before we finish, I would like to thank everybody on the stage for taking the time. And Jason, thank you so much for facilitating this very, very informative conversation.